Okay, we're going to do some clinch control today. We've had some questions about the first program. We looked at how to get into the clinch and how to use the 5 swords theory to control the person's offense. And I want to go into some detail with that because we didn't go into a lot of detail in the first program. We didn't want to get off track too much. We wanted to cover the top 10 most common attacks. Now we're going to take the common ones that can lead to a lot of different situations, particularly what do you do once you're in the clinch. We're going to look today specifically at the overhook, which is one of the most basic and most natural clinch controls that you're going to find yourself in initially off of the punch defense. Okay, so let's review our 5 swords control, and then we're going to look specifically at some clinch control things using the overhook. Now remember, the wonderful thing about the 5 swords is that it is preventing both his takedowns and his strikes without having to think about it because the control's the same. First of all, let's look at basic clinch theory. Why am I clinching my opponent? There are 4 basic reasons, and you want to be clear about what your tactical motivation is. What are you trying to achieve? It's a really simple idea. The first idea is clinching is the simplest way to stop him from hitting me. So if he tries to hit me and stuff, I get close to him and I tie him up, and it impedes his ability to strike me. So that's the first and most important one under surprise self-defense conditions, is it prevents the guy from getting his strikes off. Secondly, I can use that control position to tie him up but launch my own strikes. We're going to be looking at some of that today. So the idea that I should stand here in this danger zone and punch at him while he's punching at me is a silly idea. We talked about that. If he's bigger and stronger than me, he could hit me before I could hit him. He's got all this space to work. So if I want to hit him, I should put him in a control position which minimizes his ability to strike me or hurt me and maximizes mine. So that's the second reason, is to launch my own strikes, but in a way that gives me control. Second 2 are the same, but from a takedown point of view. If he's actively working to take me down, if I tie him up in the same way, it prevents him from being able to take me down. And just like setting up my own strikes, I can set up my own takedowns, okay? So these are things we're going to see more in MMA when we're looking at fighting a skilled opponent. In the beginning, especially under surprise and street conditions, we're talking more about defending against strikes. The takedowns will be relatively simple compared to that. If the guy's, all he can do and all he's thinking about is trying to either hit you or headlock you, your takedown options are pretty simple. So let's begin with that basic idea. So as we saw in the 5 swords, when the guy goes to hit me, I want to get as close as I can, generally using this wedge here. Now, not only is this wedge good control, it naturally puts my elbow in a position where it's easy to drop my arm and then wrap him up with an overhook, okay? So basically, your overhook is divided into 2 kinds. If we end up square to each other like this, if I just put my hand over his, this is generally what you would call an overhook. We're facing each other, and I'm just putting my arm over his, generally holding at the elbow here. If I'm able to get more sideways to him, which will happen when I step in between his legs to control that, I'm able to slide this hand up and get closer to his shoulder. That's what we refer to as a wizard in wrestling. And this is important because it gives you shoulder control. Now, it's not a lock of any kind. I'm not trying to attack his joint. I'm trying to attack his posture. By getting shoulder control, I can lever his head down like this, and once his head is down, I can keep it down. These are some of the advantages of clinch control. So that's the first idea, is why do I put this hand deeper through the armpit? Is to get shoulder to shoulder control here. And why do I want shoulder control? Because I can push on him with my body, and that helps get his head down. Now when I combine that with my inside hip control here, which obviously stops him from kneeing me with this leg, if I stand like this, I'm fighting with the guy. I've got all this room to get hit in the body or the groin. Once I step in, I control that point. Now, if I hip bump him like this and do a pushing motion with my shoulder, boom, you can often get the guy's head down, and I'm going to use a figure 4 here to keep him down. Now, obviously, if I want to hit somebody in a self-defense situation, this is a hell of a lot more advantageous position than standing up against a guy who's 4 or 5 inches taller than me, and he's bouncing, my head back while I'm trying to throw back, which most systems of self-defense teach you that you're supposed to stand right where the guy wants you, between his arms in his area of operation, and make a game out of it, like who's going to hit each other harder, like a bad John Wayne movie. And somehow we're supposed to be able to negate all this movement and stuff. It's dangerous. Okay, so let's reiterate. The punch comes. I'm going to try and get as close as I can. Oops, sorry about that. I actually ran into, which happens all the time, depending on the relative height. If he's much taller than you, you're likely to spear him somewhere in his shoulder or body. It helps, but it's not a big deal. If he's closer to your own height, you actually often hit him in the head, and you don't have to think about it. So I'm going to try to hit with that other hand. I got to make sure I'm using control here at the bicep. Okay, so I get my overhook or whizzer when I'm really deep like this. I'm trying to get my shoulder as close to his. When I use this hip bump, I get his head down, and boom. There's a much simpler way to hit the guy. Okay, that's the use of the whizzer off of your initial entry. Okay, so we're looking at using the tight overhook, which is often known as a whizzer. It's just a method of shoulder control. Remember, when we're talking about pummeling, later when we do our pummeling program and we're controlling by definition the different joints, remember that technically a whizzer is shoulder control. I'm trying to get as close to his shoulder as possible. Okay, so from here, he's trying to hit me with his second hand. Remember, I want to use a cobra hook here, and one of the most important things that's neglected old school jiu-jitsu is the placement of my head. I want to make sure my head is in the socket here. This is one of your simplest and most effective ways to strike somebody is with your head. Remember, the top of your head is literally the thickest and hardest bone in your body. Not only is it impervious to punches, as we talked about in our bulletproof drill, it also makes a hell of a weapon. This kind of training has largely disappeared because it's illegal in MMA now. But if you look at the old Vale Tudos from Brazil in the early MMA that happened in the no-holds-barred format back in the early 90s, headbutting's vicious, man. It's harder than any punch you're going to throw, and it's a lot easier to do. In fact, it's almost hard to practice. What are you going to do? You're headbutting the bag. You got to be careful. You have a brain down like soccer players. So remember, by getting my head lower than his, when he tries to headbutt me, he's headbutting himself. And all I have to do is create a little bit of space and then boom, pull him back into you. This kind of thing, you have to practice it more with helmets on when you're doing your basic pummeling. It's built into it. Every time you're fighting to get your head under here, you're fighting to set up your headbutts. If you're trying to be, really vicious, you can push the guy away and then pull him into you. When you practice, you can pop on your shoulder and stuff. You got to be careful. Headbutts are really, really underrated in a lot of ways. They can cut you, they can hit hard, especially this side angle. One of the worst places to get headbutted for whatever reason is here on the temple. In the face, of course, it's vicious. You can break the nose and bang up his face really badly, but you're not necessarily going to knock him out. But on the side here, for whatever reason, it sends kind of a shock to his nerves, and it gets good results here. So remember, the headbutt is a key one. So I want to be able to defend his punches, set up my overhook here, and control this far head. Bang, bang, use my headbutts. I'm constantly trying to unbalance the guy by pushing my hip into him. I don't necessarily have to pick this leg up, which can be problematic when you're on certain surfaces, but if my base is okay, I simply have to bump him like this, bump him and try to whizzer. Now, something you'll run into a lot, especially against untrained guys, is they think that they're going to get their arm out this way. Well, they are, except that they're not doing anything but making their position worse. So a trained guy is very unlikely to want to pull his arm out this way, because the only thing that's preventing you from getting around behind him is this arm. Right now you're controlling it, so he's going to fight with you to try to get an overhook. But if he pulls his arm out, it's pretty easy to slide behind him. From here, we can take him down, hit him with impunity, things like that. Sometimes you're not as fast as you'd like to be, and you can't get all the way around behind him. So when his arm comes out, he naturally is putting it into this Russian 2-on-1 position. Now, we use this a lot in weapon defenses, so I think it's always important whenever I train in grappling or no-gi, I'm always trying to do this 2-on-1 because it's connecting me to the weapon segment. I'm always practicing my weapon defenses without having to pull out a weapon. But in street fighting MMA, it's not optimal because clearly you've got this second hand free and you've got a lot of space behind you. Now, it's not as bad as it looks. You see this used a little bit in MMA. If I get my head in and stuff, it's good, and I can always block here. But basically, I don't want to be in here very long. I want to use it as a transition, unlike how we use it in straight grappling when there's no strikes. You can stay here for longer periods of time, do different things. But as long as I've got this inside hip here, I can still use that to unbalance the guy and make it difficult for him to try to to hit me with this. But one good transition from here is to go back here, switch to your underhook, which is something we'll look at in detail what to do with underhooks. But basically, when you're fighting MMA or you're training without gis and you don't have a lot of different grips, you've really only got two kinds of shoulder control here. You've got the overhook, which is your whizzer, and you've got your underhook. Okay, so you'll be switching back and forth. The underhook will deal specifically, but I want you to see the transition from one to the other. So I'm here, sometimes a guy will put his arm here, snag this 2-on-1, pull it out. You could try to unbalance him here, but anytime I want to switch, I just need this hand to come over, lift him up, and boom, you're now back into your overhook. Underhook. And if I'm able to get his head down, we're in the optimal dirty box clinch here, which is a really good place to be. Okay, so that's the basic ways that you're going to find yourself controlling against the punches initially. So when he throws that punch, think about how your elbow is going to end up. In this case, I got to make sure I'm stepping this way, trying to get control at this point. When I drop my elbow, I'm going to end up in a whizzer, and I can control here or here. Okay, now if I can't get control of his arm, which could be difficult initially because your head's in here, you really can't see well. If you're trying to hit me with this hand, I just need to control his head. It's hard for him to punch around my arm. And from here, he'll have more time to then go here, and if he's got a sleeve on, this is perfect. Now, we talked about wanting to hit the guy, having optimal control of him. We covered this in the weapon defense section, but it's even more applicable here. If I get control of this arm like this, and I've got my whizzer here with my hand through his armpit, it's really easy to do this. Once I'm here, he's got no arms. Now, depending what he's wearing, which makes a difference, because if he's really strong, he might be able to rip off his own clothing here, but depending, you know, in a grip like this, I've got a good strong grip. It's going to take a while for him to pull his arm away from here, pull away. It's hard, and while he's doing this, I'm unbalancing him, which makes him a lot weaker. Now, this is where I hit the guy. Boom. Boom. This is, you know, this is beautiful compared to standing out here like every so-called self-defense system wants you to be, fighting with a guy who's punching you in the head and kicking you and you're trying to punch around him. It's a silly idea. If I tie him up, at least for a few seconds, I have an extreme advantage as far as hitting the guy. This is the next best thing to putting him on the ground, where I can create those same conditions, plus I have gravity on my side. So basically, if you want to look at it conceptually from what kind of advantages and disadvantages you have, this is the worst thing, because he is free to do whatever he wants to me as I am to him. This is a competition. Who's bigger, faster, has longer arms, whatever. Once I get close to him and tie him up, this would be a really nice way to do it. I have a great advantage here, but we're still moving around. If I put him now against a hard surface, like a wall or the side of a car, then I've limited his movement even more. And then finally, if I'm able to put him on the ground with me on top, then I have gravity control. That's optimal. So you can look at that sliding scale of how you can get advantageous positions for striking.